Hey everyone, welcome back to Inglebard Gaming. Well, here it finally is. The first episode in the tutorial series for Deflemask that I've been threatening to make for quite some time now. Alright, settle down. Anyway, I strongly urge everyone watching this video, if you haven't already, go and watch my primer for this series first, which is called How Sound Works on the Sega Genesis / Mega Drive. That video will give you a foundation and some concepts that you'll need to understand everything in this video, and indeed the entire series, going forward. If you've ever wanted to know how to create music for the Sega Genesis, or pretty much any old school system, well, this is the tutorial series for you, my friend. And all you need to get started is your computer, a keyboard, the kind that you type on, and a copy of Deflemask. There are free and paid versions of Deflemask available on their website, and I'm going to cover how to use both. You don't need to know any programming, and you don't need to know any music theory, although we'll be touching a little bit on music theory as we go along. By the time we're done with this series, you'll be able to create your very own Sega Genesis music. Heck, by the time we're done with this episode, you'll be able to do that. Now, I can't promise your songs are going to be any good. Nobody's good at first. I know I wasn't. Let's touch on what exactly Deflemask is. Deflemask is a music tracker. It essentially gives you a grid that you fill in with notes and effects to create music. You can then export that music into files that can be imported into games that run on the real hardware of multiple systems. This tutorial will focus on the Sega Genesis / Mega Drive, but Deflemask also lets you create music for a host of other systems. There's a legacy version of Deflemask that isn't officially supported anymore, but is completely free to everyone. There's also a current, regularly updated paid version of Deflemask with more features. So when it comes to this Genesis music stuff, you might be wondering,
and why should the people listen to you?
Good question. I've been working in Deflemask and creating Genesis music for a while now. You may have heard my work in the demo for the upcoming RPG Affinity Sorrow. Or maybe, at the moment, the music I've been doing for Pigsy's Genesis demake of Castlevania Symphony of the Night is a little more well known. I'm also in the middle of finishing up a Genesis version of Street Fighter Alpha's soundtrack. Aside from that, I've contributed songs to several demos, including Master Lin Kuei's Splatterhouse and Psycho Master's Sega Master System Castlevania demo featuring Symphony of the Night artwork. Also, as of this recording, I have over 40 songs I've done on my chiptune music channel linked above and in the description. There's also a few old ones on this channel too if you want to go spelunking. Now, how long have I been working on Genesis music? Well, just a little over a year. Yep, that's it. How long have I been working with music trackers like Deflemask? Just a little over a year. But surely I had a bunch of musical training, right? Nope. Just what I got in elementary school, junior high, and high school almost 30 years ago. Well, that and one short college course on beginner piano. Now, I'm not telling you that to brag. I'm telling you that to point out that if a know-nothing like me can do it, I'm sure that anyone can if they're willing to put in the work and the time. I mean, I've only recently taught myself to read music semi-proficiently, and I'm talking about in the last 4 months or so. To be fair, I did used to work on MIDIs 20 years ago, but that was entirely different. I wrote the music for an old PC game from Dragonlore Software called Homeland around the year 2000. More recently, as in the last year or so, I've also scored a short film on a compilation and will be doing another one of those very soon. Now perk up everybody! 25 of you are about to get a pleasant surprise. Because I'm such a nice guy, I've got 25 copies of the current paid version of Deflemask to give away for the low price of absolutely nothing. That's right. How do you win yourself a free copy of the commercial version of Deflemask? Well, because I'm also kind of a jerk, I'm going to tell you somewhere later in the video. So if you want to find out how to win, you'll just have to keep watching. Allow me to briefly cover the lesson plan for the entire tutorial series. It is my intention for this Deflemask tutorial series to contain 8 parts. Now that number could change a little depending on how things go, but as it currently stands, here is my existing lesson plan. Primer: How sound works on the Genesis / Mega Drive. That one's already up. Episode 1, Deflemask 101. You're watching it now. Episode 2, Deflemask Menus and FM Instruments 101. Episode 3, FM Instruments 201. Episode 4, How to Use Samples. Episode 5, Using the Sega Master System PSG. Episode 6, Advanced Effects. Episode 7, Putting It All Together. So as I just mentioned before, this is, of course, all subject to change. And I'm going to be very upfront with you and let you know that I've got a medical issue and I'm going to be having surgery in a couple of weeks, so I'll be gone for an indeterminate amount of time after that. Might be a few days, might be a few weeks, might even be a few months. I just don't know yet. But if you look at my site, which I've been running for just over 2 years now, you can see I've been incredibly consistent in that time frame, and it is fully my plan to have all episodes in this series completed and online during the year 2022. Now that you know what to expect, let's get on with it. The only things you'll need today are a computer, a keyboard, the kind you type on, and Deflemask. I'm going to cover both the current and legacy versions so everyone can follow along. You can get either version from the link in the description, so go ahead and download it. Like now. Pay attention to where your downloaded files go. The program doesn't use an installer, you just run it. You can put it into any folder you want. Oh, and I'll be doing this whole tutorial series on Windows-based PCs. So if you use another OS, sorry, I can't help you with any specifics there, but most of what you see here will apply to any platform. Now, go put Deflemask where you want it to reside permanently on your computer, and then launch the program. Here's what both versions look like. We've got the legacy version on the right, and the paid version on the left. It might seem a little intimidating if you've never used a tracker before, but don't worry, everything's cool. I'll start with some bigger picture stuff and we'll drill down details as we go. If there's anything you don't understand after watching the video, feel free to ask me about it in the comments. Okay, let's focus on the legacy version first. I think the legacy version always launches with the Sega Genesis as the active system, but just in case, here's where you change that. It's under Options and then Change System. A side note, don't click Sega Genesis (EXTCH3) on here. That's a different mode and we'll delve into that another time. Make sure that you just click Sega Genesis. Now let's look at the key areas of Deflemask. This giant section here is basically the actual tracker. This is where you'll enter notes and various effects, which for the purposes of this video, you'll just be doing on your standard computer keyboard. Each column here represents an individual sound channel on the Genesis's sound hardware. The first 6 channels are the FM channels of the YM2612, and the last 4 are the PSG channels of the SN76489. If you don't know what those are, then seriously, go watch the How Sound Works on the Sega Genesis video before continuing with this one. Alright, you'll notice each channel has a bunch of columns. Stop noticing things. Focus! Let's take a look at the same stuff in the paid version of Deflemask. As you can see, this section is much the same between the two versions. Things will diverge a bit as we move on, but for right now, very similar. Alright, let's move back over to Legacy. Moving on, in the upper left area we have the pattern matrix. Basically, each block of music in the tracker is called a pattern. You can add a whole lot of patterns. Each pattern will have a set number of rows. We control how many rows are in each pattern with a different setting that I'll show you in just a moment or two. Now, while you don't need to know any music theory for this series, if you do, you can think of a pattern sort of like a measure, or you can have a group of measures in a pattern. It's all up to you how to structure your song. Now the buttons to the right of where it says Pattern Matrix allow you to insert a new pattern, delete an existing pattern, or copy an existing pattern. The Pattern Matrix can be a little finicky and it's easy to mess things up in here. You'll have to be careful not to click anything by accident in this area. Now this is where things get a little more complex. Each cell in the pattern grid has a number in it. If you left-click a number in the cell, it will increase. If you right-click a number in the cell, it will decrease. You can use these functions to easily repeat a pattern in a song, like say a drum beat or a bass line that is the same for many patterns of the song. This means you only have to enter those notes once and can repeat that pattern cell as many times as you need to. In the upper right of this area, we have a checkbox for Change All. If you check that box and then click a number in a pattern cell, the whole row will either increase or decrease depending on whether you left or right click. So be very careful when using that. Last few things here. In the upper right above the scroll bar, you have 3 arrows. These are not used for scrolling. The up arrow will move the current row up 1 row. The down arrow moves the currently selected row down 1 row. The double down arrow adds a new pattern to the very bottom of the pattern sheet, and it copies the currently highlighted row into it. Whew, that's a lot of pattern talk. Let's see what the same stuff looks like in the current paid version of Deflemask. As you can see, it looks a little bit different. The basic functionality is the same as the legacy version. There's just a few things that are moved around and modified. In this version, the plus sign adds a row, the trash can deletes a row, the 2 sheets of paper copies a row. The circle is the equivalent of select all from the legacy version. The arrows have been moved from the scroll bar to the row of icons here, which I think is a good improvement and makes more sense. This version of Deflemask has a few improvements to pattern navigation, but we'll talk about that a little later. Okay, I think we need to take a break now to look at one of my cats. Here, does your brain feel better now? Let's move on. We'll pop back over to Legacy for this part. To the right, we have the Instrument section. This is where we'll create, define, or load our instruments. Just like with patterns, we can add, delete, or copy instruments. You can also name each instrument. You can have a lot of instruments, and I'm not sure if there's a hard limit, but my advice is to only keep the ones you're using in your song in the instrument list. Next to each instrument, you'll see FM and Edit. If you click FM, it toggles to STD, which instead of being an unwanted, social disease, just means standard in this case, which changes that particular instrument to a Sega Master System PSG instrument. Click it again to toggle back to YM2612FM. If you click Edit, the instrument window will open up. You may also hear instruments referred to as patches when talking about FM sound. Here you can modify the parameters of your instrument. We can also save or load instruments from inside this window. Today, we'll just be working with the default FM instrument. We'll deep dive into instruments in the next 2 episodes. So for right now, we're just going to close this. Now you'll notice in the instrument section, there's a separate entry for samples. Good for you. Now ignore that, because we're covering that in its own dedicated episode later. Now let's look at the instruments in the current version of Deflemask. Like with the pattern section, the instrument section has been cleaned up and modernized a bit, but is functionally similar. We've got the plus, delete, and copy icons, which look and work like the ones in the patterns section. Here we have 2 new icons, though. The first is an open folder, which will let you load an instrument. The second is a disk icon, which will let you save an instrument. In the legacy version, as you saw, saving and loading are in the instrument window. In the current version of Deflemask, they're over here instead. Alright, back to legacy. Next, we're going to talk about octaves. Now, if you look just to the upper right of the instrument section, you'll see the word octave. You can hit the plus or the minus to raise or lower the octave. If you don't know what an octave is, it's basically how high the pitch on a range of notes is. And you know what? Let's just take a step back for a second. Musical notes range from A through G. On a piano or a musical keyboard, these are the white keys. Some of the notes have steps in between them, which are flats or sharps. On a piano or musical keyboard, these are the black keys. Flats and sharps can be weird since a B flat is the same note as an A sharp. Why? Who cares? Let's move on. But seriously, that's how sharps and flats work. Now don't worry if you can't read music. Here's a little visual aid and I'll explain. This thing here is a staff. On a staff, we have a clef. This is a G clef. It basically tells us what octaves we'll be playing our notes in. Every line or space on that staff represents a musical note. The bottom line of a G clef staff represents the note E. Then as you go up, the next note is F in the empty space, then the next line is G, and then on the next space it starts over at A. Now octaves run from one C note to the next. So basically each octave will be C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and then the next octave starts on the next C. Now in Deflemask, we need some way to represent which octave each note should be played in. Deflemask does this by putting the number of the octave next to the note. So if we place a C note while on octave 3, it'll put down C-3. If we want a lower pitched C note, we can lower the octave to 2 and place a C note with the same key. Hey, look at that, now it's C2 instead. If we need a much higher C note, we can change the octave up to say 6 and press the same key on the keyboard. Look at that, now we have C6. All you really need to know about octaves is the lower the number, the lower and deeper the pitch of the note you'll play. The higher the number, the higher the note. That's it. When you change the octave in Deflemask, it only changes the octave of the notes you're playing on the keyboard or placing down in recording mode now. It doesn't do anything to notes that you have already played or recorded. But don't worry, you can edit those after placing them, and we will talk about that. In the current version of Deflemask, the octave section is a bit more to the right by default, but it works the same. Plus and minus will raise or lower the octave you're currently playing or placing notes down in. Whew. Again, that's a lot of ground we've covered already. I think it's time for a little break, and you know what we do during breaks. That's right, cat time. Speaking of time, let's talk about timing. And we'll head back to Legacy Deflemask. So the first thing we're going to look at here is bass time. That's bass as in B-A-S-E. Bass time is how fast the song plays overall. It may seem a smidge counterintuitive, but 1 is the fastest speed even though it's the lowest number. If you raise the bass time number, the song will slow down. If you lower it, the song will speed up. But you can't lower it below 1. Alright, now pay attention here, this one's important. There are 2 more speed values that you can adjust independently. Let's take a look at the tracker section where you enter the notes. If you look to the left, you can see a bunch of numbers. Those are row numbers, which are, well, just what they sound like, the number of that specific row of data. Now let's head back up to the speed section. So there are 2 numbers here and 2 sets of plus and minus signs. The first plus and minus controls the first number, and the plus and minus to the right of it controls the second. The first speed number, which is speed A, is how fast even-numbered rows will play. Even-numbered rows start at 0 in this case. The second number, speed B, is how fast the odd-numbered rows will play. For the most part, you'll probably want to keep these numbers even if possible for the smoothest playback, but at a minimum, you'll usually want to keep these numbers at least close together. If you have too large a gap between them, you'll start to get uneven playback speed. And no one wants that, do they? Alright, still up in the same section, we could look at where it says rows here, and this determines how many rows are in each pattern. See, I told you we'd get back to that. The number of rows in a pattern is completely up to you. If you read music and are transcribing sheet music, you might want to keep a row length of 24 or 32, depending on the time signature you're keeping. But you don't have to. You can have your whole song in one giant pattern if you want, but that would be a nightmare to edit. Generally, I'd suggest keeping patterns somewhere between 24 and 64 rows, but it really is up to you. Next up is step. This is just how many lines the editor will jump after you enter a note. So with step 0, when you enter a note, it doesn't move the cursor at all. If we set this to step 1, it'll jump 1 line after you enter a note. Set it to 2, and it jumps 2 lines, and so on. This can be helpful once you have your timing down, and it will allow you to enter notes quickly. Now beneath that section we have the clock. By default, you can toggle it between NTSC and PAL. NTSC means your playback happens at 60 Hz, or the speed of a US or Japanese console. PAL speed is 50 Hz, which is the speed of a console in Europe, Australia, or other regions that use the PAL video standard. If you check the custom box, you can enter any speed you want in Hertz for playback. This will let you fine-tune the speed of your song even more. Now let's jump back over to the current version of Deflemask. You can see once again that things look basically the same here. The only real difference are the removal of a few buttons to add multiple rows at a time, and the custom clock speed checkbox is missing. Oh no, what do we do? Fear not, my intrepid student, for the paid version allows you to simply type the number you want into the box and press the enter key for every item listed here. So no more futzing around hitting buttons multiple times, which is a nice quality of life change. I'll also note that, for me at least, I couldn't use the enter key on my numeric keypad. I had to use the standard enter key for text entry to enter a value, so be aware of that if you're using this version. There are two other minor changes here I'll go over with you real quick. First, to the right of the clock speed, we can see the BPM, or beats per minute, all the time now. In the legacy version of Deflemask, you can see the beats per minute, but only when the instrument window is closed. The other change here is that they added a couple of boxes for the highlight rows. This just determines where you see the highlighted lines in the tracker grid itself and how far apart they are. We'll talk about these next time. Other than those few changes, everything else I mentioned about the legacy version applies here too. One other little thing I'll note in both versions is that you have your author and title text fields so you can enter the metadata about your current song. Alright, well guess what? Feline time! Aw, look at him, isn't he cute? You know, there's a lot of stuff in the Deflemask menus, and I don't want to completely overload you with all the options, including some you might never use.
Like putting too much air in a balloon!
So, tell you what, we're going to kick off Lesson 2 next time by going over those. I'll take you through a few basics as needed before we finish up here today. For now, we have bigger fish to fry. Right, I think it's time you made some music, you slacker.
You're a slacker. Do you want to be a slacker for the rest of your life?
I'm going to stick with the legacy Deflemask for this part, but the things I'm going to do work exactly the same in both versions. Now when you open Deflemask, it may be in read-only mode, meaning that you can play notes and hear them, but they won't be entered into the tracker. Why would you want that? Well, so you can tweak your instruments and hear what they sound like and practice your notes before you record them. Now looking at the screen here, what do you think we press to enter record mode? That's right. In either version, you can press the record button up near the top of the screen to toggle record mode on or off. You can also do this by tapping the space bar. Right now, let's leave record mode off. Before we go on, I'll also note that we're just going to use the default FM instrument for music today. The default instrument sounds a little different in each version. It's a lot nicer in the current Deflemask, but again, either version is fine here. To enter notes, you'll have basically 2 octaves and a bit of keys accessible to record your notes. The current octave starts at the row of keys beginning with the letter Q. This entire row will be equivalent to the white keys on a piano or keyboard, meaning that they're the natural notes. The number keys above these, those will be the black keys and are set up just like a piano. They'll be your sharps and flats. Now the octave below the current one starts on the letter Z, and that whole row has all the white keys for that octave. And then the row above it, starting with the letter A, will contain the black keys for that octave. Go ahead and play around for a moment with all those notes. Did you leave record mode on accidentally and just enter a whole bunch of notes? Well, don't worry, it's cool. Just click on File and then New and discard the current sheet. You'll get a brand new one. Make sure recording is off and then hit some notes. Got that out of your system? Alright, time to get serious. Follow along and enter these notes and things with me. First, go to Instruments and then click on the 0:INS0 to make sure it's selected. Next, go ahead and set rows to 32. In Legacy, you can use the double plus to add a lot of rows at once, and the double minus to subtract a lot at once. In Paid, you can just type 32 in the box and hit enter. Then go over to Step, and let's set that to 4. We'll go to the bass time, and we'll set that to 1. For speed A and B, let's set both of those to 3 if they're not already set to 3. Next, go to the grid and click or double-click on the spot right next to row 0 under the FM1 column. Ready? Alright, hit record or the spacebar. Now, hit the following keys on your keyboard. Y, T, R, T, Y, Y. And then hit space to turn record mode off. Now let us play back this masterpiece. Hit the play button near the top of the screen. That sounds a little fast, doesn't it? While the song is still playing, go ahead and change your bass time to 2 by clicking the plus sign next to bass time. If you stopped, don't worry, it's okay, just set it to 2 and then hit play again. Haha, that's better, isn't it? Hey, this is Mary Had a Little Lamb when played at a reasonable speed. Alright, go ahead and hit the stop button to stop the playback. Now let's go to that pattern matrix in the upper left. If you're on Legacy, click Insert or INS 3 times to add 3 more patterns. If you're on the current Deflemask, hit the plus sign icon 3 times. Then make sure you click 00 in the pattern matrix under the first column. In Legacy, it says CH above it. In current Deflemask, it doesn't say anything, it's just blank in that corner. But anyway, when you click that, the whole row should highlight. Do not click the numbers underneath the individual channels in the pattern matrix right now. Why not? That changes the active pattern for that channel in that row. If you already clicked it by accident, don't worry. You might be freaking out and saying, "Hey, where'd my masterpiece just go? It's gone!" Well, underneath FM1 in the pattern matrix, we just need that to show 0. If it says any other number, you just clicked it by accident. Or on purpose. Hey, no judgment. Anyway, to change that number under any channel in the pattern matrix, you just left-click on it to increase it and right-click on it to decrease it, like I told you before earlier in the tutorial. So if this shows a 1 or a 2 or something higher, just keep right-clicking it until it shows 0 there again. And this works in both versions of Deflemask. There's a nicer way to do it in the current version, but we'll talk about that in the next episode. Alright, next up, all the way to the left in the pattern matrix, click 01. This will highlight the second row. Now down in the tracker itself, we'll also see it highlight the next pattern which we can now edit. Which brings me to a quick note here. You can only enter notes and make changes to the pattern that is currently active in the tracker. You can see other patterns, but they're darkened out and you have to scroll to make them the active pattern before you can edit them. Now that we know that, let's continue with the song. Make sure record mode is active, and in the main tracker portion of the screen, click the dashes just to the right of the 000 in track 1 underneath FM1 and type in these letters. T, T, T. And now we have something of a problem. We need to have a rest or a bit of silence in this area. So let's do this. We'll go back up into the area where it says step. Step 4 is what's set right now. Let's change that to step 0. Then go back down to the tracker area. Click on line 16 here. And we'll have to make sure we're still in record mode. Now press Y 1 time. Then click on row 20 and press I. Then click row 24 and press I again. Notice something? Deflemask guesses at how many steps to take after you enter a note or two based on the last few notes that you've entered. But you can always override that just by clicking on the row that you want. Now let's listen and see how this is coming along. In the pattern matrix, click on 00, and then go over to the controls and press play again. Isn't it beautiful in a hideous sort of way? Let's finish this song up real quick. Up in the pattern matrix, click on row 2 so that it's highlighted. Let's also change step back to 4. Now let's go back to the tracker grid in row 0 under FM1. Type in YTRTYYYY. Then just scroll down either with your mouse wheel or the slider to the right. And hey, look at that! The next pattern highlights automatically. If we look at the pattern matrix, we can see that pattern 03 is now highlighted. Let's start at row 0 under FM1 again, and then type in these keys. TTYTR. Alright, let's play our finished work. That's right, the mystery has been solved and the lamb's fleece was indeed white as snow. You know what we need now? More channels. This song needs to sound more ominous, wouldn't you agree? Let's scroll back up to the top of pattern 0, or you can just click 00 in the pattern matrix. Let's go to FM 2. Make sure we're in record mode still, and press X. Now let's scroll down to the second pattern, pattern 01, and on row 0, let's press Z. Now let's scroll down to the third pattern, which is pattern 02, and on row 0, press X. Let's end with a flourish. Scroll down to the fourth and final pattern, which is 03. On row 0, type X. On row 8, type C. And on row 16, type V. Now let's go back to the very beginning in pattern 00, and let's play this. Hey, look at that! You just made a song with 2 channels! Way to go! Let's end today's lesson with something nuts. Now don't worry about following along with this part. I'm just going to show you how you can spruce things up. But you know what? Wait a minute. I kind of forgot. I mentioned something about some giveaways for the paid version of Deflemask, didn't I? Well, here's what you do to win one. Anyone can enter. You don't have to be a subscriber. Add a comment to this video and say, I want to win Deflemask. Also, tell me what operating system you want it for. It's available for Windows, Linux, Mac OS, iOS, or Android. You can only choose one of those operating systems, and you can't change it later, so make sure it's the one you want. Also, there's only one comment allowed per username. Duplicates will disqualify you from winning anything. If you're among the first 25 eligible comments, I'll reply to your comment to let you know that you won, and also that you have to email me within 24 hours and tell me the email address at which you'd like to receive your download link. If I don't hear from you within 24 hours, I'll move on to the next eligible comment. You agree to let me show your username as a winner in a future video so everyone can see I gave away all 25 copies of Deflemask on offer. If your username is your real name, I'll blank out your last name for privacy. I won't share your email address with anyone, and I'll delete it after I send you your message with your download link. Alright then, back to Mary Had a Little Lamb. Like I said before, you don't really have to pay attention to this or try to follow along. I'm going to add in an arpeggio. I'll go over chords and arpeggios in the next episode. One cool thing you can actually follow here is I'm going to be adding an echo effect. Ever heard Genesis games where it sounds like an instrument echoes? It's actually pretty easy to achieve that effect in a few different ways, and I'm going to show you one of them here. The simplest way to get the echo effect is to just copy and paste the notes from one track right into another and offset them by either 1 or 2 rows, depending on the speed of your playback. Check it out. Well, that sounds pretty cool, doesn't it? I'm just going to show you one more thing for today's lesson in the actual tracker grid here. We're going to enter something that's kind of an effect. Volume. We can control the volume of each individual note if we want in each individual channel. On Genesis FM, 7F is the maximum volume and 00 is the minimum. If you don't know how hexadecimal numbers work, don't sweat it. They'll be in lesson 2. I don't want to break your brains today any more than necessary, but I can promise you they aren't going to be hard for how you use them in Deflemask. Now I'll take the main melody here and I'll make that maximum volume. I'll take that sort of bassy part and I'll make it a little quieter. Then I'll take the main arpeggio and make that one max volume. And I'll take the echo arpeggio and make it just a little softer. And here's our final result. Pretty nifty, huh? And if you want to save this so you'll have it forever, just click on File and then Save. If you ever want to load it, well, guess how you do that. File and then Open. And that's going to do it for today's rather lengthy introductory lesson on Deflemask. Alright, let's summarize what we covered today. So first we covered what Deflemask is and what it's used for. Next we covered the various elements of the Deflemask UI and how to adjust them. After that, we went over how to enter notes into a pattern, how to play it back, and how to adjust the speed and timing of playback. After that, we learned how to enter notes in multiple channels for simultaneous playback. From there, we took an early glimpse at how to enter volume control for individual notes and how to do a neat little echo effect. Not bad for a single tutorial episode, huh? So now you may be wondering, what's next? Well, for you, the answer is practice. What I want you to do from here is open Deflemask on your own and create some of your own music. There's really no substitute for experience. Your first songs probably won't be any good, but like I said, nobody's good at the beginning. My first stuff was complete garbage. What's next for the tutorial series? Well, we'll wrap up some odds and ends about Deflemask, cover another little thing we need to know, and then from there we'll dive into FM instruments. Now, FM instruments are a complicated topic, so I'm going to spread that out over 2 episodes, or at least that's the plan right now. But you don't have to wait for me. Every version of Deflemask, free and paid, comes with a series of FM instruments that you can use right out of the gate. So you can just start loading those up, playing around with them, and see how they work. It's not absolutely required that you do that before I do the next tutorial episode, but I strongly recommend it, because having some exposure to these things before we do a deeper dive will probably help you understand them better. Alright, that'll do it for this video, my retro gaming music friends. If you enjoyed this video, please toss it a like and share it. If you haven't yet, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and you'll never miss another video. If you want to support the work I'm doing in this series or in general, you can now do that at pages I've recently set up for both Patreon and Ko-fi. With that, I'll say thanks for watching, and see me later.